Welcome back, builders. In this lesson of day 2, we're going to go a little deeper, but not deep enough to turn you into a software architect overnight, but deep enough to give you a mental model of how web applications actually work. And I promise by the end of this video, a lot of things that used to feel like a foreign language are going to start making a lot of sense. Let me start with a simple but important question. What is the difference between a website and a web application? A website is essentially a place you go to find information. Maybe you fill out a form here and there, but that's about it. A web application is still a website, but it does something. You perform an action and you get an output. I guess a good example of this is if you go to your favorite blog or read an article in a certain news place, that is a website. You are there for information. But if you open Canva, for example, in your computer and start designing a graphic, downloading it, editing it, that is a web application. You're creating something, you're getting outputs. That is the difference. Everything we are building in this course is oriented to create a web application, something that actually creates or does something for the user. A web application is made of two essential components, the front end and the back end. The front end is everything the user can see and interact with, buttons, forms, pages, menus. The back end, on the other hand, is everything happening behind the scenes, processing the data, logic, the security. The best way I can explain this is a restaurant analogy because I think it maps almost perfectly. Think about this, the dining room is the front end. That is where you sit down, look at the menu, talk to your waiter, or place your order, and eventually receive your food. You can see everything happening in the dining room. You are interacting with it directly. The kitchen, though, is a different story. That will be the back end. You have no idea what is happening in there. You do not know who is the chef or how the food is being prepared, how the orders are being organized. All you know is that your order was placed and food came back eventually. But behind that experience, there is an entire operation running. And that operation is what makes the restaurant actually work. As we start building, this distinction is going to come up constantly. When AI asks you whether something should happen on the client side or the server side, it is actually asking you, should this happen in the dining room or in the kitchen? Now, inside a modern web application, different parts of the app and even different apps entirely need to talk to each other. The way they do that is through something called API. Now, I know that sounds like a weird name, but that basically stands for Application Programming Interface, which is a very intimidating name for something that is actually very simple. You can think of an API like a power outlet. Different applications have their own power outlets, and when you want to use their capabilities inside of your app, you plug in. For example, when we connect our app to Stripe to process payments, we're actually plugging into Stripe's power outlet or Stripe's API. When you want to add AI capabilities to your app, you plug into the API of Anthropic or OpenAI. You're not building those capabilities yourself. You're just extending your app by connecting to something that already exists. Now, going back to the restaurant example, in the front end is the dining room and the back end is the kitchen. But there is something that helps us communicate between the dining room and the kitchen. That's the waiter. The waiter is the API. The waiter is how the dining room and the kitchen communicate. You tell the waiter what you want, the waiter goes to the kitchen prepares it, the waiter brings it back. That exchange, that back and forth is exactly how APIs work. And by the way, this happens both inside of your app between your own front end and back end, but it also happens outside of your app, connecting to external services like Stripe, Firebase, or an AI provider. Now, the next piece of the puzzle is the database. And I cannot stress this enough. Your app needs a database service. Here is why. When a user interacts with your app, creates an account, makes a booking, places an order, that data has to live somewhere, and it has to live there permanently until it gets deleted by the user or the server. If it only exists inside the app itself, it disappears the moment the user refreshes the page. That data is what we call ephemeral. In other words, it does not last. A database gives that data a permanent home. When the app loads, it goes to the database and says, hey, give me the data for this user. The database responds, the data appears in the screen, and by the way, this is how every serious application works. And this is also where security becomes critical, because the database is not just storing the data, it is responsible for making sure the right data goes to the right user. Going back to the restaurant example, I cannot bring your check to the table next to you. That information is confidential. In your app, enforcing those rules at the database level is what keeps your users' data safe. And it is something you cannot reliably do from the front end, because the front end is exposed to the world, including bad actors. This connects directly back to what we covered in day one. Secure by design starts in the database. Now let me quickly walk you through what actually happens in the background when someone opens your web application. First, the user types the URL into the browser, something like www.myapp.com. The internet does not speak human language, it speaks numbers. Those numbers are called IP addresses. So there is a system called DNS, the domain name system, that acts as the translator. It takes your domain name and converts it into the address where your app actually lives on the server. Think of it like the host at the restaurant. The first person who receives you finds your reservation and shows you your table. Once your app loads, the API calls begin. The front end starts communicating with the backend internally. The backend talks to the database. Data comes back and is presented to the user. The page comes to life. The waiter starts taking orders. The kitchen starts cooking, and the experience begins. It is a chain of events that happens in milliseconds, so fast that you cannot even tell when one of these actions happen. And now you know how that sequence of events actually happen and how it looks like. Listen, I know this is a lot to absorb. You may need to go through this video a couple of times, especially if you have never encountered any of these concepts before. But here is why it matters for your specific case. When you are building with AI, AI is gonna make mistakes. It is going to generate code you do not fully understand. It is going to ask you questions that sound a little bit technical, and without this foundation, you will not know how to respond or even how to do research on the problem. With this foundation though, you have enough context to ask the right questions, recognize what AI is doing, and course correct whenever something is going the wrong direction. You do not need to be an expert, you just need to know enough of this mental map to be able to navigate it successfully. I'll give you a quick example. Just yesterday, I was working on a client app and I noticed that the AI coding assistant, or Claude in this case, was looping through a process, and I noticed that it was continuously asking for permissions, which is something you will get used to. At least in my case, I don't recommend to completely give free access to AI to do whatever it wants. But when I noticed that after the third cycle on this particular issue, I went ahead and said, hey, what are you trying to do? Because I noticed that it was like a complicated command line interface command. And when it came back with the answer, it said, I need to change this character in this file. And I'm like, well, just give me the file name and the line where this character lives, and I'll go ahead and change it. Because it was taught, the processes in AI, once again, are predictive, and it was just trying its best. After the first failure and a second failure, it was just gonna keep looping forever. So I took the output, which was perfect, and then I went ahead and replaced that particular character in that particular line in that particular file, which it gave me. So I say that to encourage you that there will be many moments like these throughout the process of you building your app. So knowing this baseline, knowing this foundation is going to help you not to be intimidated when those moments happen. And I want to give you another example. Just yesterday, a client reached out to me and said, I need this booking system, and off-the-shelf software does not give me what I need. So I went ahead and used this same blueprint that you're building. The requirements were not as complicated. In about 2 hours or so, the client had a live application that was exactly what they needed. Listen, this is the type of skill that you're building with this course. It really feels like a superpower. It is. It empowers you to create something that didn't exist before. It is real, it is practical, and it is genuinely powerful. Please keep going. I will see you in the next lesson.